Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you for joining me once again today. My name is General Confusion, and this, of course, is Total War Warhammer 2. I do have to apologize, this is not going to be a battle video. I've actually been rather ill for the last couple of days, which is why I haven't been playing many battles. And so I don't really have anything kind of good to show off. So instead, I'm going to be kind of doing a midweek discussion of the Lizardmen, kind of talking about what I've learned, and what I still want to explore. I'm not ending my Lizardmen focus yet because I don't think I'm done with them. But I just wanted to kind of relatively briefly go over some of the units and Lord picks and all of that. And in particular, I wanted to talk a little bit about general strategy. So we looked at the Skaven for quite some time, and the Skaven had this very kind of specific strategy where victory is all about kind of drawing the enemy in and taking them apart piecemeal. Where you have these specialist units, you know, the Poison Wind Globadiers, and the Gutter Runners, and the Death Runners, and the Plague Monk Sensor Bearers, all these units that are very, very good in specific situations. And so you have to suck the enemy forward, divide them up a little bit, and then use your specialists against the targets that they are good at defeating. The Lizardmen function in a very different way. The Lizardmen are all about shock. You could say that the Lizardmen are kind of a blitzkrieg army, although speed is not the salient characteristic for them. I would characterize it rather as mass. So with the Lizardmen, you have these fairly expensive Lord options that have the option to be much more expensive in order to become a giant monster. And you have, of their lineup, I think 50 or 60% of their lineup at least is large units. They really, really focus on large units. What that means is that has pros and cons. On the downside, it means that they're very easy to counter, generally speaking, because there's really only a couple kinds of Lizardmen builds that can be taken. Playing as, say, the Skaven against the Lizardmen, Poison Wind Globadiers, or Stormvermin Halberds, anti-large units are always a safe pick, because I can almost guarantee there's going to be at least one or two expensive large units in a Lizardman army. Kroq-Gar on Grimlock by himself is over 2,500 points. I could take off his abilities. It makes him quite a bit weaker, and he's still over 2,000. He's still 2,200 points, even without his Hand of Gods. A lot of the coolest Lizardman units and most useful Lizardman units are large monsters. So, on the one hand, it makes them very predictable. On the other hand, it gives them a whole lot of concentration of force, to a degree that I think a lot of other factions can't even match. So, to expound on what I mean there, you can view quick battles in particular as a resource allocation game, where you have a finite amount of resources, funds, going into the battle, and your job is to build an army with those funds that has the tools you need to win. One of the important characteristics of an army is its concentration of force, which in this case means can be simulated by cost, by having few expensive units. So if I have Lord Mazdamundi on Zlak, I can play with his spells and his abilities and items and all of that, but he's probably going to come in to be useful at about 3,000 points. In other words, he's a quarter of my army. That seems very vulnerable, but if you look at his stats, he actually backs it up. He has a huge pool of hit points, he has a huge amount of armor, he has very high weapon strength, and a bonus versus infantry, a very high charge bonus, he has this ranged attack, and of course he has all his spells and abilities, so he can use these things, and he has the toughness to stay alive. What this means is that Lord Mazdamundi is a huge concentration of force. Basically, he's a quarter of my army, all in one spot. So I can take Lord Mazdamundi, 3,400 points of monster, against 1,000 points, even 1,000 points specialized against monsters, and he's going to win. With his various abilities, with his general toughness, with his high weapon damage, he is going to win that fight. And he will then proceed on unimpeded to win other fights across the battlefield, because when you have large single unit monsters like this, their ability to cause damage does not go down until they break, until their leadership or their HP hits 0. Until that point, they are fighting just as effectively as one at 100% HP. Unlike a unit of Storm Vermin Halberds, for example, where as their HP ticks down, as they take damage, they lose models. And losing models means they're losing attacks, which means they're effectively dealing less damage. This unit ablates. This unit does not ablate. It's either fully active or it's non-functional, and you have to take it all the way to non-functional in order to render it ineffective. Whereas this unit, if you take this unit down to 30% health, it's probably basically ineffective. It's certainly much less effective than it was at the start of the battle. If you take this unit down to 30% health, he's still doing just as much damage as he was at the very start. This ties in with the other Lizardman strength, which is healing. Every Lizardman hero and every Lizardman lord has a casting of Cold-Blooded, which is a very effective healing ability, and they have the option to take Bastiladons with Revivification Crystals, which have a healing ability. It doesn't heal a huge amount of HP at one time, but they get 10 casts, which means if you take 1 or 2 Bastiladons with Revivification Crystals, everyone has the possibility of healing up to 6,000 HP during the course of the battle. That's more than the healing cap for pretty much any unit. I mean, maybe Mazdamundi's healing cap is 6,000 extra HP. I think for pretty much any other unit in the game, it's lower than that. So, basically, every Bastiladon with a Revivification Crystal, if used properly, is the equivalent of another extra unit that you've kept alive during the battle. Plus, of course, it's a Bastiladon, so it has very heavy armor, it has a large HP pool, it has a bonus versus infantry, and it has that high weapon damage. What this means is that the Lizardmen really need to focus in order to succeed. I think one of the most viable Lizardman builds is the Wrecking Ball, where you have a core. I mean, you have some support units, but you have a core of monsters. You could take Mazdamundi on Zlak is one great option. You could take a Scar Veteran on a Carnosaur if you wanted, but I wouldn't even bother because I would rather have a magic user or a caster. Well, if you take Mazdamundi, you should probably take the Scar Veteran on the Carnosaur. You have a Revivification Crystal or 2. You have some Feral Bastiladons. This, right here, forms a monstrous core. And these units, with the use of the healing abilities, say you throw in a Skink Priest of the Heavens, put him on a Pterodon, change his spells around a little bit, because a lot of these you don't really need, you just want him for damage spells. Or, since you have Mazdamundi, maybe you don't even. Maybe you take another Scar Veteran. Maybe you have 2 of those. That's probably too expensive. Anyway, so this right here, these 6 units, form the core of your army, and all the other units are support, including the infantry. Infantry is usually the main combat arm, but that's not true for the Lizardmen. You can make an infantry Lizardman list, but in doing so, you're kind of stripping out the value of all of your more high-end monsters. And so the monstrous core is very, very easy for the Lizardmen to keep alive, because they have the Revivification Crystals, because they have the castings of Cold-Blooded. I think Mazdamundi might be a little bit too expensive. I would tend to go with Krotgar or even an Old Blood, just because he's about 1,000 points less, gives you more support units. But in general, what this means is your support units will die throughout the course of the battle, and they'll ablate away in the way that infantry and other multi-model units do. These units will not. They will keep going until they die, and with the Revivification Crystals and the castings that you have of the various healing abilities and spells, like I said, you take this guy, give him Curse of the Midnight Wind and Wind Blast, doesn't need anything else, he's only 800 points. He gives you a casting of Cold-Blooded, and he can fly. And he has, of course, a damage spell, a very effective damage spell if you overcast it, and a debuff spell, which is very useful. So these units right here, you can keep most of those alive through until the end of the battle by using the various healing abilities on them continuously, and whenever they break and they're running away and nothing is fighting them anymore, drop a Cold-Blooded on them. They'll heal up, they'll come right back in, because Cold-Blooded will heal over 1,000 hit points. You can drop Revivification Crystals, you can just cycle these back and forth over and over, you don't have to worry about running out because you have 20 casts. And then you can have, you take other units to fill in. You take a couple of Chameleon Skinks for skirmishing, take some Saurus Warriors, take some Croxagores, whatever it is. You have to be a little bit careful with your funds if you've taken this many monsters, but this many monsters, if you can get to the end of the battle with these monsters largely intact, then you've won. Because at that point, the enemy's infantry will be beaten up, their ranged units will be beaten up, they won't have enough concentration of force to take down this death squad. When you combine these units together, they become extremely difficult to defeat. because you have all that high damage, high armor, high health pool in the same place. And that is what makes the Lizardmen different. That concentration of force. If you're looking at the High Elves or the Dark Elves or the Skaven, yeah, they have expensive units. The High Elves can probably come closest because they have the Dragons, which have a lot of concentration of force. But like the Dark Elves, you know, unless the Dark Elves go full in with War Hydras and Black Dragons, which probably isn't a good idea because they're a good bit more vulnerable than the Lizardmen monsters with their low armor, usually the Dark Elves are going to have a whole bunch of infantry. And that means they actually cannot concentrate 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 points in a small area like you can. I could take all of these units and have them all fighting one infantry unit. And that infantry unit will be dead in 30 seconds. I don't care what it is. It could be the Black Guard of Naggarond. They're still gone. Instantaneously. Just because when I have all this damage and all this HP concentrated in a small area, there's nothing that can be done about it. So, to my mind, this is one of the most effective ways to play the Lizardmen, is to focus very, very heavily on having a core of units that you will try to keep alive. And the salient feature is that these monsters can outlast your opponent while still maintaining their damage output at a high level. I mean, their damage output isn't hugely high on the Bastiladons, but it'll stay there. They'll be doing splash damage and using their anti-infantry bonus and all of that throughout the whole battle because it just doesn't go away the way the damage of the Black Guard does when they take casualties. So the counter to this is ranged units. Basically, armor-piercing ranged units, artillery, dark shards, that kind of thing, because these monsters rely heavily on their armor in order to stay alive, and ranged units allow you to concentrate the killing power of multiple units in a small area, just like dinosaurs do. So, you know, with a Dark Elf list, if you take 4 Dark Shards with shields, those units can all fire on the same unit. That's, you know, 2,600 points worth of killing power, all aimed at one target. Just like, you know, these 3 units are 2,700 points of power aimed at the same target, or Kroq-Gar plus a Bastiladon. You see what I'm saying? It's all about concentration of force. Infantry can't do it very well, but ranged units can. And with that armor piercing, they're very good at taking down large units like this. So, the Lizardmen have to bust through the front line. They have to get through, they have to take out the ranged units first. The infantry are secondary targets. Because infantry can be threatening, especially if you have anti-large armor-piercing infantry on the field. But they can be dealt with a lot more easily. And you don't have to... Their threat envelope is a lot more limited. Infantry can only reach you if they can touch you. Ranged units can reach you from quite a ways away. And they can reach you when you're already engaged with somebody else. And if they have armor-piercing, they'll do a whole lot of damage. So when it comes to the Lizardmen, unlike, say, the Dark Elves really want to engage the enemy infantry line and destroy it, and then kind of sweep onwards, because they're very good at destroying infantry lines with the Black Ark Corsairs, the Hargoneth Executioners, the Witch Elves, all that stuff. They're good at a face-to-face infantry fight. The Lizardmen don't want to focus on destroying your infantry line. They want to send in something that will, you know, take up time and will acquit itself reasonably well. You know, some Saurus Warriors, some Kroxagors, whatever, a couple of Chameleon Skinks to back them up. But basically, these Saurus Warriors aren't expected to win an infantry fight. What they're expected to do is do damage and live long enough for the monsters to get through or go around and get into the ranged line and destroy it. So that when the end of the battle comes, the enemy weakened infantry is left facing the dinosaur goon squad that is still at pretty much full health because they've been healing themselves continuously as the fight has gone along. And that is the situation in which the Lizardmen can win very handily, because their death ball of dinosaurs can't be stopped by weakened infantry. Infantry that's taken leadership damage and health damage and has lost models, so its damage output is low. Those units can't stop dinosaurs effectively, pretty much no matter what they are. So to play as the Lizardmen, you really want to get through. You want to rampage across the battlefield. You need to keep your mobility from being impeded, which is another thing that these dinosaurs are good at. They have a lot of mass, so they can slam right through and not be stopped by anything. And you want to take out the units that can concentrate a lot of force on you at one time, the ranged units, the enemy monsters to an extent. But really, your goal is to get to the end game where your infantry line is gone and their support units are gone, and you want to be able to take on their infantry line, what's left of it, with a hard core of monsters that are in good shape. And if you can accomplish that, then you're probably going to win the battle. So, like I said, that's about all I have to say today. I will be playing more battles. I'm going to be getting back into recording videos regularly on a daily basis soon as I've gotten rid of this darn cold or sinus infection or whatever it is. But thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of y'all. And stay tuned. There'll be some more interesting Warhammer 2 content coming your way very soon. Take care.